Evelyn stepped into the bustling terminal, her worn brown handbag swinging lightly at her side. She had arrived early as usual, preferring to sit quietly and observe the flow of people rather than be caught in the hectic rush of last-minute boarding. Her clothes were simple, an unremarkable gray cardigan, a modest skirt and scuffed shoes, but neat and clean. Nothing about her attire would draw attention, and that was exactly how she liked it. Yet today, she didn't expect that being understated would turn into a problem. The boarding gate was crowded. Families with children clutched colorful backpacks, business travelers tapped impatiently at their phones, and tourists fumbled with suitcases, passports, and tickets. Evelyn moved quietly through the line, keeping her head down and her steps careful. She had flown this airline countless times before, always checking in discreetly, always boarding without incident. But today something felt off. As she approached the front, a flight attendant glanced at her and frowned. There was something about Evelyn's presence that seemed to irritate her. "Excuse me, ma'am," the attendant said briskly, pointing toward the side. "I'm afraid you can't board this flight," Evelyn blinked. "Pardon me? But I have a valid ticket," she said softly, producing her boarding pass with careful hands. The attendant's expression hardened. "Your ticket may be valid, but we have to follow regulations. You don't look like you belong in first class. I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." A flush of disbelief and humiliation crept across Evelyn's cheeks. Step aside? She had been treated like this countless times by strangers, but never in her own airline, never at her own gate. She opened her mouth to protest, but the attendant cut her off. "Please, ma'am, it's for everyone's comfort. Step to the side while we resolve this." Whispers rippled through the nearby passengers. Some smirked discreetly. Others shook their heads, looking between Evelyn and the attendant. A few even chuckled quietly. Evelyn felt their eyes like tiny pricks against her skin, judgmental and unrelenting. She gripped her handbag tighter, a small anchor in a sea of mockery. As she was gently but firmly guided away from the line, a pang of anger rose within her. How dare they judge her based on her appearance, her simple clothes, her quiet demeanor? She had built the airline from nothing, flown countless planes, overseen safety procedures that saved thousands. Yet here she was being treated as an outsider in the very place she had created. Evelyn moved to a small seating area near the boarding gate, hoping to quietly wait while the misunderstanding was cleared. But the flight attendant lingered, watching her as if she were a problem to be managed rather than a passenger to be served. Evelyn's eyes scanned the terminal, noting the puzzled looks, the judgment, the faint smirks of those around her. She tried to keep her expression calm, composed, but inside a storm brewed. The sound of footsteps behind her made her turn. A man in a sharp pilot uniform approached, clipboard in hand. There was a moment of hesitation in his stride as he looked at Evelyn. Something about her seemed familiar. The whispers of the passengers fell silent as he stopped beside her. "Excuse me," he said, his tone polite but authoritative. "What seems to be the problem here?" The attendant straightened, perhaps emboldened by the presence of a uniformed figure. "Sir, this passenger, she looks inappropriate for this flight. We're asking her to step aside." The pilot's eyes narrowed slightly, scanning Evelyn from head to toe. Then his gaze softened. There was recognition in his expression, a flicker of understanding that cut through the tension. "Her name?" he asked quietly, almost to himself. "Evelyn Grace," the attendant replied, hesitant now, unsure why he seemed so concerned. The name hung in the air like a sudden, invisible thunderclap. The passengers nearby stiffened, their whispers faltering. The pilot's eyes widened in astonishment. He turned fully toward Evelyn, his professional demeanor giving way to surprise and respect. "Evelyn Grace?" he repeated as if testing the words. "The Evelyn Grace?" Evelyn nodded slightly, her own surprise mirrored in his reaction. "Yes," she said calmly, though her heart raced. For a moment, silence fell across the gate. The other passengers stared, some in awe, some in shock. The flight attendant looked like she had swallowed her words, suddenly aware that she had just attempted to humiliate the very woman whose vision and leadership had made this airline what it was. The pilot stepped forward, his authoritative presence commanding attention. "This is Mrs. Grace," he said, clearly addressing the entire boarding area. "She is the founder of this airline. She has spent her life building this company, ensuring the safety and comfort of every passenger on this flight and countless others. I suggest you allow her to board immediately." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Passengers who had been smirking moments ago now looked ashamed. The attendant's face flushed crimson as she realized her grave mistake. I didn't know," she stammered. Evelyn stood composed but firm and allowed the pilot to guide her back toward the boarding line. Passengers stepped aside respectfully, some offering silent apologies in the form of polite nods. A few younger travelers even clapped quietly, acknowledging the irony of the situation. The person they had judged so harshly was, in fact, the very architect of the airline itself. As she walked toward the plane, Evelyn kept her head high. The humiliation she had faced moments before was replaced by a quiet, satisfying vindication, yet she also felt a pang of sorrow. How many times had she seen people judged by appearances, overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed? Just as she had been moments ago, she made a mental note to herself. Every act of kindness, every gesture of respect mattered more than any wealth or title. Once aboard, she settled into her seat, glancing out the window at the bustling tarmac. The engines hummed in anticipation, ready to carry passengers across the sky, and Evelyn, watching it all with quiet satisfaction, reflected on the strange irony of life. Sometimes, even the ones who have built entire empires are mistaken for strangers. She looked around the cabin, noticing the curious eyes still turned toward her. Some passengers whispered among themselves, others stared in wide-eyed amazement, a few smiled politely. And somewhere deep down, Evelyn knew that moments like this, moments of misunderstanding and sudden revelation, were not just amusing or shocking. They were reminders of the fragility of judgment and the enduring strength of perseverance, dignity, and humility. The pilot came by to check on her, offering a discreet nod of respect. Evelyn returned it with a faint, grateful smile. She knew the flight ahead would be smooth, but the journey to this moment, the struggles, the misjudgments, the long nights, the relentless perseverance was what truly mattered. As the plane doors closed and the engines roared to life, she leaned back, calm and composed. She was no longer just a passenger. She was a silent testament to resilience, a living example of quiet strength. The whispers and smirks of strangers had no power over her. Only the recognition of her own value and the subtle awareness that she had changed the lives of countless others, even before stepping aboard this very flight. And with that, the plane taxied down the runway, lifting into the sky, carrying Evelyn Grace forward, still underestimated by some, revered by others, but unshakable in her dignity and legacy. Evelyn had barely taken her seat when a murmur rippled through the cabin. Passengers craned their necks, whispering to each other, their curiosity palpable. The woman they had mocked moments ago was no ordinary passenger. She was someone whose name carried weight far beyond their understanding. Yet the hum of engines and the soft overhead announcements could not drown the invisible tension in the air. Evelyn, calm as ever, settled back, her hands folded neatly on her lap, her eyes fixed on the plane window. Outside, the runway glinted under the morning sun, reflecting the polished metal of her airline's planes lined up in perfect formation, an unspoken testament to the empire she had built quietly. Decades ago, the pilot, Captain James Foster, remained by her side for a few moments, clearly unsure how to address the situation. He had seen many passengers in his career, from nervous first-timers to arrogant frequent flyers, but nothing compared to this. There was something in Evelyn's demeanor, her calm, her quiet authority, that demanded respect, even without a uniform or badge. He glanced at her boarding pass again, confirming the name. Evelyn Grace, he muttered under his breath, a mixture of disbelief and newfound respect in his tone. He had read about her in the company briefings, followed her journey as a legend in aviation circles, but seeing her here, treated as ordinary and judged unfairly, stirred something deep within him. As the cabin crew attempted to regain composure, the murmurs from passengers escalated. A young man near the aisle whispered loudly, "Did you hear? That's Evelyn Grace. She's the one who owns this airline." Others froze mid-conversation, eyes wide, whispering back to confirm. "No way, and that's her?" The realization spread like wildfire, creating an electric tension throughout the cabin. The whispers transformed into glances of shame, disbelief, and awe. Evelyn remained serene, aware of the shifting energy around her but refusing to let it disrupt her composure. Captain Foster finally spoke, his voice carrying calm authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. There seems to have been a misunderstanding at the boarding gate. This passenger," he gestured toward Evelyn, is the founder and owner of Global Air. I assure you she is fully authorized to be here." The effect was instantaneous. The crew straightened, some exchanging embarrassed glances. Passengers murmured apologies, some silently, others audibly. An elderly couple sitting across the aisle murmured, We didn't know," while a businesswoman pressed her hand to her lips, realizing how unfairly they had judged her moments earlier. Evelyn gave a gentle nod to acknowledge the apologies without speaking. Words were unnecessary. The recognition, now public and undeniable, spoke louder than anything she could say. Even the flight attendants who had initially been dismissive seemed momentarily stunned. One young attendant, clearly flustered, approached timidly. "Mrs. Grace, I'm sorry for the confusion. I didn't know." Evelyn smiled softly, her eyes warm. "It's all right," she replied calmly. "Judgment happens. What matters is how we respond to it." The plane began to taxi, engines roaring with the familiar power that she had always respected. Evelyn leaned back in her seat, watching as the city shrank behind her. Yet even in this quiet moment, her mind was active, analyzing every nuance of the morning. She thought about the countless times she had witnessed others being underestimated, the silent prejudices that colored people's interactions, and how often brilliance went unnoticed simply because appearances deceived. She knew this moment could serve as a lesson not just for the passengers on this flight, but for anyone who heard her story. Captain Foster returned to the cockpit, leaving a small commotion of admiration and chatter behind him. The plane ascended steadily, slicing through the clouds, leaving the city and its misunderstandings below. The cabin slowly settled, the initial shock transforming into quiet conversations and reflective glances. Evelyn allowed herself a deep breath, appreciating the irony of the situation. She had been judged, humiliated, and dismissed in mere moments, yet that judgment had only amplified the respect and acknowledgement she now received. Several young passengers, emboldened by curiosity, approached her quietly. A teenage girl asked softly, "Mrs. Grace, did you really build this airline from nothing?" Evelyn nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. "Yes, I did. But building an airline is only part of it. Every decision, every challenge, every person matters. And no matter what they say about you or how they treat you, your actions define you, not their opinions." The girl's eyes widened. "So, people were wrong about you this morning?" Evelyn chuckled softly. "Not wrong exactly. They only saw one small part of who I am. Everyone sees what they want or what they think they see. But your true character shines in how you respond when no one is watching, or when everyone doubts you." By now, the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted completely. The passengers who had whispered and smirked earlier were now silent, reflecting on their assumptions. Even the children, who had been impatient and restless during boarding, looked on with fascination, unaware of the full depth of Evelyn's life but sensing the gravity of the moment. Captain Foster returned briefly, leaning over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we ascend to cruising altitude, I want to personally acknowledge Mrs. Evelyn Grace, the founder of Global Air. She has dedicated her life to aviation, safety, and service, and it is an honor to have her on board." The plane filled with polite applause, some quiet, some more enthusiastic. Evelyn inclined her head in thanks, her composure unshaken. The recognition was gratifying, yes, but it was the lesson in perspective, humility, and perseverance that mattered most to her. Throughout the flight, Evelyn observed the subtle changes in behavior. Passengers who had initially judged her based on appearances now treated her with cautious respect, glancing her way with admiration. Flight attendants moved with renewed attentiveness, ensuring her comfort, perhaps silently acknowledging the power of underestimating someone. Evelyn's thoughts wandered to the larger implications of this simple airport incident. How often society dismisses brilliance hidden beneath ordinary exteriors. How easily people judge without knowing the full story. As the plane leveled at cruising altitude, Evelyn allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. Her life had been a series of challenges, triumphs, and quiet victories. She had faced skeptics, competitors, and naysayers at every step, yet she had persevered. And now in this small but poignant episode, the echoes of judgment and recognition played out in microcosm, reaffirming what she already knew. Integrity and determination endure far longer than fleeting opinions. In the middle of the flight, a young businesswoman approached her, whispering with curiosity and admiration, "Mrs. Grace, Do you think it's ever possible for people to truly see beyond appearances? Evelyn smiled warmly, her eyes twinkling with wisdom. Some do, but many don't. That's why you must always act with integrity, kindness, and patience. Let your actions speak. They will reach farther than words, and sometimes they will surprise even the most skeptical observers. The young woman nodded, inspired, and returned to her seat. Evelyn leaned back, her eyes scanning the clouds outside the window. Each puff of white against the blue sky seemed symbolic, a representation of clarity emerging from confusion, truth from judgment, and resilience from misunderstanding. By the time the flight crew served the mid-flight refreshments, the mood in the cabin had shifted entirely. Passengers who had been judgmental were now reflective, some quietly apologizing to themselves for their earlier behavior. Children who had been restless now watched Evelyn with wide-eyed curiosity, as if sensing that this ordinary-looking woman carried extraordinary stories. Evelyn allowed herself a soft smile, acknowledging the subtle but powerful shift that had taken place. As the plane glided smoothly toward its destination, Evelyn felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was more than a personal vindication. It was a teaching moment, an opportunity for people to reconsider their assumptions, to see the value in humility and perseverance. The pilot, aware of the silent lesson being imparted, gave her a respectful nod from the cockpit door. Evelyn returned it, understanding that recognition when paired with grace could transform even the briefest encounter into a lasting lesson. The plane had leveled off, the steady hum of the engines providing a soothing background to what had been a dramatic start to the flight. Evelyn sat upright, hands folded neatly on her lap, her eyes gazing out the window at the endless stretch of clouds. The early morning sun reflected softly off the wings, casting a golden hue across the cabin. Despite the unexpected humiliation at the boarding gate, followed by the shocking recognition, Evelyn remained composed. The passengers were now aware of who she was, the founder and visionary behind the airline. But she knew that true respect was earned not by titles or appearances, but by actions and integrity. Captain Foster returned to the aisle, quietly checking on the passengers while occasionally glancing at Evelyn. His expression was one of respect and admiration, tinged with a hint of disbelief at how someone could be so quietly remarkable, yet hold so much influence. He approached the galley briefly to speak with the flight attendants, ensuring everything was running smoothly and that Evelyn's needs were discreetly attended to. Though she required nothing extravagant, the gesture itself reflected the subtle acknowledgement of her authority and experience. A few passengers, still recovering from the shock, began to approach her with polite questions. A middle-aged businessman leaned forward, curiosity evident in his eyes. "Mrs. Grace, may I ask how you started this airline?" he whispered, careful not to disturb the entire cabin. Evelyn allowed a small smile. "I began with nothing but a vision," she said softly. "A vision that air travel should be safe, accessible, and dignified for everyone. It required long nights, countless decisions, and unwavering dedication. The people who believed in me along the way made it possible." Another passenger, a young woman who appeared no older than 18, timidly asked, "So, all the things we saw at the boarding gate, people judging you, that's happened before?" Evelyn nodded slightly. "Often. People judge what they see without understanding the story behind it. Judgments are easy. Understanding takes effort, but it's how you handle those judgments that defines you." The young woman's eyes widened in awe. She returned to her seat with a new sense of admiration, whispering to her neighbor about the extraordinary woman sitting quietly among them. The conversation rippled through the cabin, spreading an air of newfound respect. Passengers who had earlier whispered and smirked now glanced at Evelyn with reverence, some offering quiet smiles, others simply shaking their heads at their own hasty assumptions. As the flight continued, Evelyn reflected on the irony of the situation. Here she was, a woman who had built an empire in aviation, now seated quietly among people who had initially dismissed her based on clothing and appearance. The small handbag she carried, the plain gray cardigan, and the modest skirt, symbols of her humility, had almost caused her to be denied entry to her own plane. Yet in that moment of recognition, the absurdity of judgment became starkly clear. Captain Foster approached her again, his tone low and respectful. "Mrs. Grace, if I may, would you like to speak to the passengers? A few of them are curious and inspired by your story." Evelyn considered this for a moment. She did not crave attention, nor did she wish to dominate the spotlight. Yet she recognized the value in sharing her experience, not to boast but to teach a lesson in perseverance, humility, and dignity. She stood, her movements graceful and deliberate, capturing the attention of nearly everyone in the cabin. "I don't usually speak in these situations," Evelyn began, her voice calm but commanding. "But today presents a valuable lesson. Many of you judged me based on appearances, my clothes, my demeanor, even the way I carried myself. And while that judgment was unfortunate, it has become a teaching moment. True value is measured not by outward appearances, but by actions, integrity, and how you treat others. Every small decision, every act of kindness, every effort toward excellence, these define a person far more than a label, a suit, or a handbag." The passengers listened intently, some nodding, some wiping small tears, others silently reflecting on their own behavior earlier. A quiet sense of humility spread through the cabin, replacing judgment with admiration. Evelyn's words were not just about her story. They resonated universally, reminding everyone that respect and recognition come not from what is obvious, but from what is earned through consistent effort and character. A flight attendant approached, holding a cup of water discreetly. Evelyn accepted it politely, gesturing a small nod of thanks. It was a simple moment, yet it symbolized the shift in atmosphere, from mockery to respect, from ignorance to awareness. Captain Foster gave her a discreet thumbs up from the cockpit doorway, silently acknowledging her quiet strength and authority. The younger passengers, inspired by the encounter, began to share her story among themselves. "Did you hear?" whispered a teenage boy to his friend. "That's the founder of the airline, and we were judging her." His friend's eyes widened, a mixture of embarrassment and newfound admiration crossing his face. Even children, who had been fidgety and restless during boarding, seemed to sit a little straighter, observing the quiet confidence of the woman who had faced judgment with dignity. Throughout the flight, Evelyn allowed herself to relax just slightly. She reflected on the path that had led her here, the early struggles with finances, the sleepless nights over blueprints and flight schedules, the countless passengers whose journeys she had ensured were safe and comfortable. Every step of the way had been met with challenges, skepticism, and judgment. Yet those obstacles had only strengthened her resolve. The morning's incident, though uncomfortable, was a reminder of how easily perception can distort reality, and how important it is to rise above it. Captain Foster, noting the calm transformation in the cabin, decided to share a small story of his own with the passengers. "As a pilot, I have met countless passengers," he began. "Some are demanding, some dismissive, but every now and then you meet someone extraordinary. Today we've witnessed an extraordinary woman's quiet grace and leadership. Let this be a reminder. Appearances can deceive, but actions and integrity always shine through." Evelyn listened, a gentle smile touching her lips. She appreciated the pilot's acknowledgement, not only of her own journey but of the subtle lesson it offered to everyone on board. Respect, after all, was most meaningful when it was earned through observation, understanding, and reflection. The plane began to descend, the city skyline emerging below them as patches of sunlight danced on the buildings. Evelyn felt a deep sense of calm and satisfaction. The turbulence of judgment, the whispers, and the misunderstandings were all behind her now, replaced by recognition, admiration, and a shared understanding of what truly mattered. Passengers looked out the windows, some catching glimpses of the sprawling city below, others stealing glances at Evelyn with reverence. She remained quiet, a composed figure amidst the realization that respect often comes after judgment, and that patience, humility, and perseverance create moments that resonate far longer than any fleeting insult. By the time the plane touched down smoothly, the atmosphere had transformed entirely. Passengers gathered their belongings, many offering polite nods or quiet words of acknowledgement to Evelyn as they disembarked. She returned their gestures with a composed, gracious smile. Captain Foster, guiding her briefly through the cabin, ensured she was escorted respectfully, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Moments of judgment and recognition often define not just a single flight, but the character and legacy of everyone involved. As Evelyn stepped off the plane, the city stretching out before her, she took a deep breath. This was more than a personal vindication. It was a teaching moment, a lesson in perspective, and a reminder that quiet strength and dignity leave the most lasting impressions. The plane cruised steadily at altitude, slicing through the clouds with effortless grace. The earlier murmurs and whispers had settled into a quiet, contemplative atmosphere. Passengers no longer merely stared at Evelyn. They were thinking, reflecting, quietly absorbing the lesson her presence had delivered. Yet for Evelyn, the journey was not over. Not emotionally, not symbolically. She could feel the lingering judgments that had taken root in a few minds, the subtle doubt still hovering in others. Respect, she knew, was only meaningful when it came after understanding. Not just acknowledgement. Captain Foster had returned to the aisle to ensure that the cabin was in order, occasionally glancing at Evelyn with a mixture of admiration and reassurance. The young passengers, previously filled with curiosity and awe, now leaned closer to each other, whispering stories of resilience and integrity. A teenage girl with bright eyes asked softly to her mother, "Mom, can people really build something so big by themselves?" Her mother smiled, shaking her head slightly. "Not entirely by themselves, darling, but by being persistent, believing in their vision, and never letting others' judgment stop them." The girl nodded thoughtfully, glancing once again at Evelyn, who sat quietly, serene and composed. Evelyn, aware of the subtle attention she commanded, chose not to speak unnecessarily. She preferred to allow her presence, her calm demeanor, and her actions to communicate more than words ever could. Still, a soft smile graced her lips as she watched the transformation in the cabin. Some passengers sat with newfound humility, recognizing the error in their assumptions. Others, more reflective, jotted small notes or whispered to their neighbors, sharing their observations about the extraordinary woman among them. One business traveler, a man in his late 40s, approached her cautiously. "Mrs. Grace," he began, his voice hushed, "I just want to apologize. I judged you earlier. I thought, well, appearances can be misleading. But now I see." He trailed off, his words incomplete yet sincere. Evelyn looked up, her eyes meeting his. "Thank you," she said softly. Acknowledgement of mistakes is the first step toward understanding. Judgment is easy. Reflection is harder but far more valuable. The passenger nodded, clearly moved, and returned to his seat. Evelyn leaned back slightly, taking in the subtle ripple of change her presence had caused. Even the cabin crew, who had initially treated her dismissively, now moved with quiet attentiveness, offering her water, blankets, or simple gestures of care without intrusion. There was no showiness, no need to impress, only genuine respect quietly displayed. Captain Foster, observing the shift in energy, decided it was time to offer a small message of reassurance and encouragement to the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice calm but carrying authority, "we've witnessed something remarkable today. Often we judge by what we see, by appearances, clothing, or demeanor, without truly understanding the story behind it. Let this flight serve as a reminder that integrity, determination, and character are far more important than any outward display." The cabin remained silent for a moment, absorbing his words. Then, a few passengers nodded, others smiled softly, and a subtle atmosphere of introspection settled in. Evelyn, observing the reactions, felt a quiet satisfaction. This was more than vindication, it was education, empathy, and understanding being imparted in real time outside. The plane glided over mountains and rivers, the scenery shifting in slow cinematic beauty, sunlight reflected off the wingtip, creating a brief halo that seemed to illuminate the interior, highlighting the subtle transformations in the passengers' expressions. Evelyn watched, appreciating how physical perspective mirrored the emotional one. The view outside was vast and unchanging, much like her own experiences in life. What mattered was how people chose to perceive it. A young boy near the window, perhaps no older than 10, tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad, why was she treated so badly earlier?" His father sighed, glancing at Evelyn and then at the boy. "Sometimes people make quick judgments based on what they see. It's unfair, yes, but it teaches us to be better, to look deeper, to understand before judging." The boy nodded slowly, eyes wide, clearly learning a lesson that would stay with him for years. Evelyn caught snippets of these conversations, her heart quietly warmed. The incident at the gate had been humiliating, yes, but it had become a catalyst for learning, reflection, and growth, for both passengers and crew. Every glance of awe, every whispered apology, every reflective thought reinforced her belief that resilience and dignity could indeed create subtle, yet profound, shifts in perspective. Captain Foster returned once again, standing near her seat briefly. "Mrs. Grace," he said softly, "if there's anything you need, please let me know. And thank you for reminding all of us why we chose this profession." Evelyn's eyes met his, a faint smile crossing her lips. "Thank you, Captain. Just doing what's right is enough." As the plane began its descent, a low hum of anticipation filled the cabin. The passengers who had been judgmental at the gate now sat quietly, some gazing out the window, others watching Evelyn with a new sense of awareness. Flight attendants moved efficiently, prepared for landing, but their movements were now imbued with subtle respect rather than mere procedure. The shift in energy was tangible, almost cinematic in its quiet power. Evelyn felt a small twinge of irony. Here she was, the architect of this airline, quietly traveling among strangers who had first seen her as unremarkable, and yet within a span of moments recognition, humility, and respect had replaced judgment and ignorance. It was a reminder once again of the fragile line between perception and reality, between assumptions and truth. The city below came into view, sprawling and vibrant, streets glinting with morning traffic and the sun catching the glass of skyscrapers. Evelyn's thoughts drifted to her journey in aviation, the challenges, the triumphs, the countless lives touched by decisions she had made. She had always believed that leadership was not about titles or recognition. It was about responsibility, action, and integrity. Today, that philosophy had been tested and affirmed in an unexpected way. Passengers adjusted in their seats as the plane descended further, the runway approaching rapidly. Some glanced nervously at Evelyn, others at Captain Foster, sensing the end of the flight was near. Yet a quiet sense of awe remained, lingering in the cabin like an invisible thread connecting everyone to the lesson they had just experienced. Evelyn allowed herself a rare, soft exhale. The morning's humiliation, the whispers, the stares, all had culminated in a quiet vindication. But more importantly, it had become a subtle teaching moment, one that would likely resonate with these passengers long after they left the plane. She had not sought recognition, but she had gained something more valuable, the knowledge that patience, humility, and quiet confidence could inspire others in ways that direct action or words could not. As the wheels touched the runway with a gentle thud, the cabin remained calm but alert. The passengers, now transformed by experience, prepared to disembark with a mix of awe, reflection, and subtle admiration. Evelyn straightened in her seat, poised and dignified, a quiet figure of grace amidst the ordinary chaos of air travel. The plane slowed, taxiing toward the terminal, and the passengers gathered their belongings. Whispers of acknowledgement and quiet apologies floated through the cabin, while others exchanged glances of newfound understanding. Evelyn, carrying her worn handbag and dressed simply as she always did, stood gracefully, allowing herself to be guided toward the exit. The pilot, Captain Foster, walked beside her, his respect evident in every gesture. Outside the window, the terminal awaited, bustling with the familiar sounds of airport activity. And inside, a quiet transformation had occurred. Judgment had been replaced with respect, assumptions with understanding, and ignorance with reflection. Evelyn's presence had reminded everyone aboard that dignity, perseverance, and quiet strength could leave a lasting impression far greater than any first impression ever could. The plane descended steadily, wheels lowering toward the runway with a soft, controlled thud. Inside the cabin, a quiet hum of anticipation replaced the earlier tension. Passengers were beginning to gather their belongings, exchanging polite nods and whispers of reflection. The modestly dressed woman who had caused such a stir, Evelyn Grace, remained poised and composed, a calm presence amidst the post-landing bustle. She had long since recognized that true leadership and respect came not from external acknowledgement, but from consistent integrity, quiet determination, and thoughtful action. Captain Foster remained close, subtly guiding her through the cabin to the exit, his expression one of admiration mixed with reverence. "Mrs. Grace," he said quietly, "your presence today has reminded all of us, crew, passengers, and myself, of the importance of humility, patience, and quiet confidence. Thank you for demonstrating that. Even under scrutiny and misunderstanding, grace and strength prevail." Evelyn offered a gentle smile. "Thank you, Captain. Every challenge carries its lesson. Today, it seems, the lesson was shared." Passengers who had initially judged her now moved with visible respect. A young couple whispered apologies as they passed her, the wife reaching out to shake Evelyn's hand. We didn't realize," she murmured. Evelyn inclined her head slightly. "It's all right," she replied softly. "Awareness is the first step toward understanding. Judgments are easy to make. Learning from them is far more valuable." Even the flight attendants who had once dismissed her approached, offering quiet gestures of deference. A young woman in uniform, clearly flustered but sincere, handed her a small bottle of water. "Mrs. Grace, I apologize for earlier. It was unprofessional, and I should have treated you with the respect you deserve." Evelyn accepted it, nodding with warmth. It's not the mistake that matters, but how we respond afterward. Outside, the terminal stretched ahead, bustling with familiar energy. Passengers arriving and departing, luggage carts rolling across the tarmac, and the low rumble of planes taxiing to gates. Evelyn paused for a moment, taking in the scene. It was ironic in a way that she had spent her life building and managing this very airport, yet today she had been judged as a stranger. And yet, from this minor humiliation, a larger story had emerged, one that would ripple far beyond the walls of the cabin. A group of children, curious and wide-eyed, approached cautiously. One little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve, pointing toward Evelyn. "Mom, that's the lady from the plane. The one everyone was whispering about." The mother smiled knowingly, whispering, "Yes, darling. That's Evelyn Grace, the founder of this airline. She's someone who worked hard to make air travel safe and comfortable for people everywhere." Evelyn crouched slightly, offering a warm smile to the children. "Hello there," she said gently. "Always remember, appearances can be misleading. What matters most is your heart, your effort, and how you treat others. Those qualities define you far more than clothes or possessions ever will." The children's eyes sparkled with understanding, some nodding, others whispering among themselves. Evelyn straightened, sensing the subtle but powerful lesson that had been imparted. Teaching through example, she realized, often transcended words. The plane landing, the cabin's transformation, and these small exchanges with passengers and children alike were all part of a singular narrative, proof that dignity and perseverance speak louder than appearances. Captain Foster escorted her toward the jet bridge, careful to ensure her passage was smooth. "Mrs. Grace," he said quietly, "I hope you understand the impact you've had today. This wasn't just a boarding incident. It was a demonstration of true leadership and quiet authority. People often underestimate what they cannot immediately recognize." Evelyn nodded thoughtfully. "Indeed, recognition is fleeting, but integrity is lasting. And moments like these, though small, remind others and ourselves of what really matters." Passengers who had disembarked earlier lingered in small groups, whispering to one another about the woman they had once misjudged. Some were in awe, others were contemplative. A young businessman remarked quietly to his colleague, "It's amazing. We judged her based on clothes, on first impressions, and yet she's the one who built this airline from the ground up." His colleague nodded in agreement, visibly reflecting on his own preconceptions. As Evelyn stepped off the plane, her modest brown handbag swinging lightly at her side, she felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. This was more than a personal vindication. It was a teaching moment, a reminder that the measure of a person is not in what the world sees immediately, but in the substance of their actions and character. Every subtle gesture, every act of professionalism, every quiet demonstration of leadership could leave a lasting impression far greater than any flashy display of wealth or status. The terminal staff, recognizing her identity, respectfully moved aside, allowing her unobstructed passage. Cameras and smartphones weren't present. Evelyn never sought publicity. But the acknowledgement in the glances, the murmurs and the subtle nods of respect conveyed far more than any photograph or headline ever could. It was a testament to the quiet power of integrity, humility, and perseverance. A reporter stationed near the terminal caught sight of her and approached hesitantly. "Mrs. Grace, may I ask, what message do you have for people who might face judgment or discrimination based on appearances?" Evelyn paused, her calm gaze meeting his. "Judgment is inevitable and sometimes harsh, but it is our response that defines us. We can allow it to discourage us, or we can let it inspire us to act with integrity and patience. Always remember, your worth is defined by what you do, not by what others perceive." The reporter nodded, visibly impressed, and scribbled notes quickly. Evelyn gave a final, courteous nod before continuing her path through the terminal, leaving behind not only a plane of passengers transformed, but a subtle ripple of understanding that would extend far beyond that morning. Even as she walked toward the waiting vehicle, Evelyn reflected on the day's events. Humiliation, recognition, reflection, and admiration had all intertwined in a single narrative. It had been a reminder of how fragile human perception could be, how easily judgment could overshadow truth, and how power, authority, and influence could sometimes be hidden beneath modesty and simplicity. Yet in every step she took, Evelyn carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her worth, not because others acknowledged it immediately, but because she had earned it through decades of dedication, resilience, and unwavering integrity. That was the real victory, far surpassing any momentary embarrassment or public attention. The airport buzzed around her, the normal chaos of travel continuing unabated. But Evelyn walked through it with serene composure, a living testament to the fact that quiet strength, humility, and perseverance could turn judgment into admiration, misunderstanding into recognition, and fleeting moments into lifelong lessons. As she entered her private vehicle and prepared to leave the airport, Evelyn glanced once more at the terminal. The passengers from her flight were beginning to disperse, each carrying a story and perhaps unknowingly a lesson in humility and understanding. Evelyn smiled softly. Today was a reminder, not just for them, but for herself, that even in the face of misunderstanding, the quiet, persistent power of dignity and integrity could leave a lasting, transformative mark on the world. And with that, Evelyn Grace drove away, not as the woman judged by appearances, but as the founder, the visionary, and the quiet force, whose life reminded everyone that true value is always recognized, sometimes just a little later than expected.